welcome to another edition of the Journeys Chat series. My name is Adarsh Varghese, and it's amazing to have you all here today. Thank you for being here. Today I'm talking to Mike Fisher. Mike Fisher is an organizational leadership consultant, and he's also an executive coach and leadership development architect. And I'll be talking to him about his new book and empathy as well. So, confidence and empathy. Mike,
Hey, Adarsh, how are you, man?
very well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. Thank you.
I'm so happy to have you here on this edition of the Journeys Chat series. Really looking forward to our chat today.
Yeah, me too. Well, I'm just very honored. Thanks for taking the time, and it's really a privilege.
Privilege for me too. I'll just make a few more quick statements and set context for people who are joining. Today in my Journeys Chat series, I'm talking to Mike Fisher. Mike is an organizational leadership consultant and executive coach. And today we'll be chatting and talking about his new book, Confidence at the Core. And we'll also spend some time talking about empathy and the importance of empathy. So without any further ado, I want to jump right in and ask you about the work you do on a day-to-day basis, Mike. So can you tell us about your work as an organizational leadership consultant and an executive coach?
Yeah, I think I basically work on three levels. So one is at the organization level. And what we would do there is we would assess basically systemic behavioral issues in the organization. Maybe there's a toxic culture, maybe teams aren't working together, they're not collaborating, they're working in silos. There could be, it can be a host of different things.
Yeah.
Second group would be to go down a level. So then we would do the same thing in a team. So we would look at team dynamics, like you might have, I don't know, maybe a vice president and the vice president's team. So you're looking at their direct reports, how do they function, all of that. And then, which would be, the third one is more executive coaching. So then that's working at an individual level. And sometimes that's in a cohort basis. So you might take, for example, the leader's team and then work with the team, but then also work with them individually. Sometimes it's just one-on-one.
Right.
But most of the time it's cultural stuff, behavioral stuff, psychological things like that. So.
Right. And is there any aspect of these three things or any of these three things that you enjoy doing more than the other or find yourself doing more than the others?
I think the answer to that is it's more the diversity. So if it's kind of the same thing all the time, then that's a little bit less exciting.
Yeah.
I would say, though, typically something that automatically brings the diversity is the individuals. So just as a person, I'm really passionate about the uniqueness of every person. Everybody basically is one of a kind. Yeah. So I do find the individual conversations, or even it could be the individual application of the same stuff. So it could be something we talked about with 100 other people, but how this person applies it is still diverse. But at a broader level, just some level of diversity. I like to do a little bit of org. I like to do a little bit of team. I like to do a little bit of individual. Ideally, you don't always get that. You get what you get, but yeah.
Yeah, and so true. Everyone is unique, and that aspect is also something that I really enjoy, meeting new people and hearing their stories. Congratulations on the new book. Excited for you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I'd love to hear more about the book and what the book is about. Confidence at the Core.
Yeah, it kind of begins. I mean, the book doesn't, but the premise of the book begins with this, and that is that every single one of us it doesn't matter who we are or what we do. Every single one of us have things that we want to or need to influence. So you might be a salesperson with a company, and your job is to influence a client to make a purchase. You could be the leader of a team, and what you need to do is you need to influence your people. You could be somebody who has to go make a pitch to your boss. Your boss asked you to come up with an idea. Now you've worked night and day to come up with this idea, and you have to go influence your boss to do it. We all go for interviews. It could be a job interview, scholarship interview. It could be all kinds of things, right? Yeah. And even in our interpersonal lives, there's an element of, there's all kinds of things that come up that we want to influence people. And so that's the starting point of the book. The book is not really about that, but where the book begins is that beyond the words that we convey, people are always reading something deeper in us. I mean, of course, they read the emotions that we're feeling, but basically when we communicate with people, we're projecting something. And one of the things that we project is our confidence, either that we are confident, or a simple way I usually put this, Adarsh, is, think of the most arrogant person that you can think of. And then does that arrogance kind of leak out of everything that they do? And the answer is, of course, right? And similarly, somebody who's insecure, that insecurity is leaking out of everything that they do. So essentially what the book is about is, I think we all want confidence. I think most of us know that it's important, but the problem is that it's extremely abstract. Like if I say, hey, be confident, well, some people over-index that, and so then they come off as really arrogant. And so they've sought to have confidence, but how the impression that they give people is kind of obnoxious. And other people, either they're not aware or they're under-indexing the confidence, and then as a result, they're coming off as insecure. So what the book is about is it's about a framework that I developed to help us manage the confidence. First of all, to assess where are we at, how do we manage it? It's essentially a continuum. So you can imagine a scale with arrogance on one side, insecurity on the other, and confidence being that perfect center point. So so it's like, how do we find out where we are? Are we indexed this way? Are we indexed that way?
Right.
What can we do to bring ourselves back to the center? And then the reason it's called confidence at the core is because while in some respects that's tactical, really our real confidence comes from stuff that's much deeper. And so the second part of the book actually digs deep into where does that identity really come from? Where do we derive our identity? That's very individual. And then what can we do at a very deep level so that we're not, what do you want to say? I mean, so that we're not pretending to be confident, but actually we are. And so there's no longer any of this faking, but it's just coming out of the core of who we are. So in a nutshell, that's what the book is about.
Great. How could people typically approach taking an abstract confidence, like an abstract subject like building confidence, and make that a framework to apply in their lives? What one or two things can they do?
Well, I suspect it's probably different for different people. I'm gonna actually shift that to a story because what I'll explain is where this came from me. I just turned 50. In my late 20s, I was appointed the MD of a furniture factory. And in simple terms, I was the biggest jerk of a boss I've ever seen. I was awful. I was yelling at people all the time, abusive, losing my temper. I was just absolutely terrible. And so about 4 or 5 years into this, I remember a period in my life, it was about 4 years, where I would scream at everybody all day, and then I would come home and hate myself all night. That was pretty much 4 years of my life. And so at the time I was desperate. I was like, I need some help. So I bought anger management books and all kinds of stuff. And stuff helped temporarily, but it wasn't like a permanent change. And there was this turning point where I was volunteering with an NGO and I was in a board meeting. And I distinctly remember this night because I remember being just as angry and just as furious in that board meeting as I had been in the factory. And up until this time, I had always said I can't control my temper. And I went home that night, and I did in this board meeting. I mean, you could probably see that I was angry, but I controlled my temper. And so I went home that night, and I kind of said, Mike, you're basically lying to yourself. You say you can't control your temper, but you just did. Now, long story short, that led me to this. What's the reason why? Why can I control my temper in this board meeting, and why can I not control my temper at the factory? And the conclusion of that story was basically I thought I thought the people in the board meeting were better than me, and I thought I was better than the people in my factory. So essentially, it was an arrogance issue or an insecurity issue. That was about 15 years ago. That moment was an absolute breakthrough moment, which ultimately led to this particular framework. And so what I started doing was I created this framework in my head, and I started using it with myself. So I started saying, hey, in this context, I'm arrogant. In this context, I'm feeling insecure. So, and then I started coming up with ways, how do I bring it back to the center? So in due course, I got out of the furniture business and I started doing what I do today. And so about 10 years ago, I start sitting with clients, executive clients. I mean, these are all now big shots, CEOs, vice presidents, directors, and stuff. And we start having the same kind of conversations. I'm being a jerk. I'm walking into a sales pitch with the CEO, the CFO, the CIO, and I'm scared out of my mind. And suddenly it was the same conversation. And I was like, well, I think I can help with that because I've gone through this. And so what happened was I started sharing it with the clients, and they started seeing a lot of value in it. And one thing built onto another, and so then it developed. So I'm not really sure. That's a very long answer. I'm not really sure if there's a formula of how to create a framework, but I will say this, Adarsh. I think lots of times if you don't live it, it's not going to have punch. And the takeaway from what I've just shared with you is
absolutely
the framework emerged out of it. I mean, you could even say it strongly. It even emerged out of my own self-loathing of, man, I'm just so awful and I want to be different and I wish to be different. And I don't know. I honestly, I probably don't have the experience to say that conclusively, but my hunch would be many times if we can't feel it, if it doesn't emerge out of our experience, even if we do it, academically, there's going to be something lacking. That's my hunch. But to be honest, I wouldn't be an expert to tell you that. So I don't know.
That's really powerful, though. And I think that's something that a lot of us watching and a lot of us people will relate to. The fact that in different contexts, we are different people, and just sort of bringing that more to, a more central, more balanced version of ourselves in most or all contexts. But I had one more question for you based on what you said. So it sounded like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like your journey to creating this framework started with introspection when you realized that there was something wrong in the way you were operating. So were you able to course correct purely by realizing for yourself where you are, but also were there layers of feedback that other people were giving you in that journey to sort of course correct and change things that you were doing?
That's interesting. I think, first of all, what I want to say is all of our journeys are unique. So I'll speak about what my journey is and then maybe broaden it out. For me, the feedback was largely abusive. So it was feedback, but it was, you're a jerk. I mean, not that they were inaccurate, because I was a jerk. But most of the time, the feedback was not really presented in a constructive way. It was either a response to me being a jerk, which was just fighting back, but more so, it was people being judgmental, trying to tell me how awful I was. happens. So in my case, yes, I received feedback. Yes, the feedback was extremely painful. Did that help motivate me to be more introspective? Yes, I think it did. Could people have done it more constructively? Categorically, yes. I think I would have had fewer wounds along the way. But to take that up to a more macro generalized thing, I mean, you would have heard of Johari window, right? That's that four quadrant thing. So there's things that we know and other people know. There's things that other people see that we don't see. There's things that we see that they don't see, and there's things that nobody sees, right? So categorically from that framework, there's at least some space of things that other people see in us that we don't see. Right. And then there are things that we see in ourselves. That's the introspection part, right? So there's things that we see in ourselves that they don't see. I suppose I would just give a word of advice to everybody, because I see this with my clients sometimes. The clients who are most positioned or best positioned for most rapid growth are the people who are able to digest feedback. And we all have our own responses to feedback, but to be honest, receiving feedback is an art form, because the average person is extremely defensive. I mean, by nature, most of us by nature are defensive. And you know, the interesting thing, Adarsh, is if you really think about it, if somebody cares about us enough to give feedback, that's like almost one of the most loving things they could possibly do. I mean, you think about it, they're risking the relationship. So they're going out on a limb, unless they're being abusive, like some of these people were with me. But if it's constructive feedback, they're putting the relationship at risk. They're putting the other person's acceptance of them at risk. So they're running the risk of being rejected. Right. All is an act of love in the interest of the other person. And you know, so yeah, I'm kind of going all over the place in the answer, but I think if we are open to feedback, it can really be a support to the whole introspection process. Now, in fairness, feedback alone without introspection is not going to go anywhere either. That's colloquially called going in one ear and out the other.
Out the other. Yeah. Absolutely. That's right. Makes sense. Makes sense. Thanks, Mike. Sid, thanks for your question. Sid Mogram, I see your question. So Sid, Sid has a question which connects to what he was saying a few minutes ago, talking about how sometimes the issues that affect our own confidence are more deep-rooted. So Sid's question is that deep-level change a function of systemic life behaviors?
It's actually the other way around. So the behaviors are a result of this deep stuff. Behavior is an expression. Let me give you an example. With my clients, I use a metaphor of a tree. All right, so and this is, I apologize, this is kind of an overused metaphor, but the root of the tree determines the fruit of the tree. So if you have a mango tree, you're going to get mangoes. If you have an orange tree, you're going to get oranges, and so on. Mm-hmm. Now, go back to the question I asked you earlier. So you think of the most arrogant person that you know, and does that arrogance come out in manifested behaviors? Well, of course it does. So they're going to be, so some of the behaviors you're going to see is they're going to vary for different personality types, but they'll be trying to be in the limelight all the time. They'll be interrupting you every time you talk. They'll be aggressive. You try to give them feedback. They'll be defensive against the feedback. They'll be harsh, especially like they'll be a bully. Okay, so those manifested behaviors are actually coming from a common root of arrogance. Now, similarly, if you take a different tree, the tree of insecurity, what are some of the manifested behaviors that emerge out of a deep root of insecurity? Well, they won't push back. They won't look you in the eye. They'll kind of beat around the bush, You'll see them dodging the question, and many others. Okay, and so to Sid's question, it's actually when we I would even suggest this is the courageous work. The courageous work is to go deep and ask the big questions of why am I arrogant? So in my factory, this was really tough. Okay, so Mike, you're acting like a jerk. The issue is not trying not to be a jerk wouldn't work. So I would tell myself, today I'm not going to be a jerk. And by 11 o'clock in the morning, I would be a jerk to everybody. And the reason was the root never changed. So the courageous work was to say, why are you being a jerk? Well, okay, the root is that you're arrogant. What's the real root? Well, you think you're better than them. Why do you think you're better than them? Well, you think you're smarter than them was one of them. So I think I'm smarter than them. Therefore, I think I'm better than them. Therefore, I'm arrogant. And my arrogance is manifesting as this abusive behavior.
Right.
And that takes a lot of courage to go there. It takes a lot of courage to say, if your knees are knocking in panic when you're going to meet the big boss, coming from insecurity, it's not about the knees knocking. Basically, you think your boss is better than you. Do you think your boss is better than you because they make more money than you, that they have a higher position than you, that their personality is aggressive? What is it that ultimately causes you to think that they are better than you? But that's the tough work. The tough work is to say, actually, they're not better than me. I'm equal to them.
Right. That's really powerful. Wow. Those of you who just joined us in the last few minutes, thanks for being here. I'm talking to Mike Fisher, who is an organizational leadership consultant, leadership development architect, and also an executive coach. And he just spent the last few minutes talking about his new book, Confidence at the Core. And we spent some time talking about various themes from his book, based on his new book. And I would highly recommend going back and watching this on IGTV, because there were some great insights that he shared. And also about the book, Mike's book, Confidence at the Core, is available as an ebook on Amazon. So go check it out there and get it. And it's also available in paperback. So if you'd like the paperback, go to mikefisher.co, mikefisher.co, and send Mike and his team an email about the paperback, and they'll send you one. So go check it out, Confidence at the Core. Thanks, Mike. I'm going to go back and chew on some of what you said again and get the full value from that. Thanks so much. Shifting gears a little bit, I know that empathy is also as a subject that's very, very close to you, and being empathetic is important to you. Why is it important? Why so?
Oh, there's so much to say on that, but I think a part of it, honestly, is the story that I shared. Sharing not the part about. I suppose a part of it was the abuse that I dealt out to everybody else. I regretted that, So I saw the pain that I caused everybody else, and all the self-loathing about that. Yeah. But I think, to be honest, my passion for empathy comes more from the suffering that I endured. People saying very hurtful things, over the years. And I suppose sometimes the most powerful things in life come from our pain. There's a clip from a U2 song even that says that. But to be honest, I think for me, that's where it comes from more than anything else. It's like, having experienced that pain, it's almost like you really don't want anybody to go through that. Is there a way that we can be better as the human race? Can we be better as people to just be more understanding? I'll just say one more thing on this. Every single one of us, Adarsh, has this deep desire just to be understood. I'm sure you feel it. I feel it. You just want somebody. it's not just to listen to you. You really want somebody to understand, like, understand the pain you go through, understand your point of view, understand why you have that point of view.
Yeah.
And empathy speaks to all of that. So I think we'll leave that there for now.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, all of us have this deep desire to be understood. And from having spoken to you a few days ago, you're talking about how, while it's easy to, especially at this time during a pandemic, while it's easy to say that we're all of us in the same boat and having a similar experience, and all of us are impacted the same way at this time. Talking to you made me see that, many of us have had different experiences, very different. My experience is very different from what someone else is going through at this time.
Right.
So what are some practical ways in which all of us can be more empathetic during a time like this, during a pandemic?
Well, one of the things that's nice to see in the world in general, first of all, one of the byproducts of the pandemic is that in a sense, the kindness quotient does seem to be going up a little bit, right? So in that way, it's really nice. I mean, people are a little bit more understanding, but still, I just feel there's a lot more room for improvement. And you mentioned we're in the same storm but different boats. I mean, there's so many polar opposites there. I'm going to answer your question in just a second, but there's so many polar opposites there. Some of the ones that I think of as there are people who are home alone in the pandemic who would give anything to be with somebody for 1 hour face to face. I mean, they are so tired of Zoom, and they would give anything for 1 hour to sit with a human being. And there are also people that are like, so sick of their spouse that they would give anything to be free of them for 1 hour. Mm-hmm. So same storm, but completely different situations. I'll give you one more and then talk about what we can do. Another classic one in this pandemic is you have some people that say, oh, this is a great opportunity for catching up and, recentering. And, so there's this whole narrative of people saying, I'm going to use this time to read the books I want to read and recenter and relax. Yeah. And then there's other people that are working 18 hours a day. I have a client. The last time I spoke to him, he had worked 49 days without a day off, 16-hour days.
That's hard. Yeah.
So you have, and what I'm thinking is if we could just introduce these two people to each other, right? For a little bit of empathy, the person that's pontificating about I'm recentering and all that. Listen to this guy. I mean, he hasn't had 5 minutes, to have a drink of water in 7 weeks. So to come to your question, I just think, first of all, the thing that we can do is we can stop presuming that everybody, that's a mistake we make. We just presume, oh, I'm going through this, so therefore you must be going through this. We basically, in psychology, we call it a projection. We project, we're projecting my experience onto everybody else. And it's just very, very bad empathy when we project. And the second thing that we can do is if we're not projecting, then what we can do is we can just listen. So listening requires this very difficult skill, which is called shutting up. I mean, we just have to shut up. I mean,
absolutely.
We have to shut up and let the other person verbalize, and what will come out eventually is not only it's not just the words, it's how they feel. I mean, empathy is about feeling what they feel, not just hearing their words, right? So eventually, if somebody has an opportunity to talk and we're not projecting our experience onto them, eventually we'll hear the guy that's worked 49 days straight. We'll hear the exhaustion. We'll hear the feeling that he wants to give up. We'll hear the hopelessness. And the person who's recentering will hear the joy and but we'll hear the experience. We won't be saying, oh, you must be experiencing what I'm experiencing.
Absolutely. So true. And also, I mean, talking about empathy in the light of what's happening in the world at the moment, especially with all these conversations about race and these very important conversations about race and that Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
All people matter, but at the moment we want to focus on the Black Lives Matter. But talking about race, as humans, I think we really need to work on showing people empathy, especially people who look different than how we look or have different cultural backgrounds. So how does one work on nurturing a sense of cross-cultural empathy? How can we build that into our systems and to our thinking?
I mean, this might be provocative, but I do think it's true for the most part. I think we would all do well if we just accepted the fact that we're all just a little bit racist. I don't care what race we are. We all gravitate, it's birds of a feather flock together, but there's something about, we think it's better also. It's not just that the birds of a feather flock together, we think our bird is better. And so in anthropological terms, that's called ethnocentrism. There's actually a fancy term for it. And essentially ethnocentrism is the belief that your culture is better. But when we apply that to race, I think there's an element of ethnocentrism about race. And again, it's a provocative statement, but if we want to have empathy about race, I think we would make a lot more progress if we would just say, look, all of us have a pinch of, it's a little provocative word, but all of us have a pinch of racism in us. So we all look down on somebody for a reason. It could be cultural, it could be whatever. And if we can start there of accepting the fact that we do, then we can deal with what we have. See, the problem is so long as we say that we don't have any, then you can't remove what you don't believe you have. It's, right. The stereotypical metaphor is, you have the word on your face, but you can't see it, right? So everybody else can see it. You can't see it. And as long as you can't see it or you're not willing to admit that it's there, then you're never going to do anything about it. I think if we start with ourselves, that's a good place to start. And then the second thing is not really unlike what we just said about COVID or the pandemic. So if we can accept that we all have a bit of racism, and then we look at somebody, whoever it is, different than us, let's just be honest. How dare we say that we understand what their experience is? Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter what it is. How can I presume that I understand what somebody who's different than me's experience is, other than again, it's the same thing, not project onto them. And can I shut up for a minute and let them tell me what their experience is? And then have at least the courtesy, and the honor to say, well, they probably understand their experience better than I understand their experience. So if they say this is what their experience is, let me give them the benefit of the doubt.
Absolutely.
That you know what I mean? And honestly, this applies everywhere. I mean, right now the focus is Black Lives Matter, but it's everywhere. I mean, all around the world, one culture, one race looks down on the other, and there's bias, and there's there's a gazillion applications to this. It's just that our focus is in one area right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And going back to what you said just a while ago about, we were talking about COVID and how it's impacted all of us differently. And all of us have had different sort of responses, and we're also in different boats in terms of how COVID has impacted us at the moment. Remita has a question for you, and she says, how do you handle uncertainty and times of anxiety? And she's asking about you. So,
Wow, really, really good question. Thanks for the question, Ramita. I, I, I don't want to say too much, but basically, how I deal with it is following some principles of emotional intelligence. And the quick answer, I'm going to give you a quick answer, and then I'll give you an opportunity if you're curious. I have a YouTube channel where I have a couple of vlogs where I talk about this, and I actually talk systematically what you can do, and there's links to resources and so on. So what I personally do is, and it doesn't matter whether it's the uncertainty or whatever, is I try to go through 4 steps. Step number 1 is I try to identify what I'm feeling. Step number 2 is I take what I'm feeling and I separate it into what is within my control and what is outside of my control. Step number 3 is anything that's within my control, I try to think about what can I do? Is there something that I can do? So for example, let's say I'm angry with somebody, and one of the emotions I feel is bitterness or unforgiveness with them. Well, the bitterness, what they do to me is out of my control, but my bitterness is within my control. So something that I can do, I may not want to do it, but I can forgive them. So it's within my control, and I can choose to do that if I wish, or I can choose not to do that if I don't wish. And then what that leaves us with is the stuff that's out of our control. And really, I mean, for those of you that are people of faith, that's where faith would plug in. So you have these things outside of your control. That's the real space where faith would come in. So the 4 steps would be identify what I feel, separate what I feel into things I can control, things I can't control. For the things I can control, what can I do? What action can I do? And how I process it, at least, is the things that are out of my control. That's where my faith comes in. Like I said, there's a couple videos on that. For those of you that, most importantly, there's a resource. There's a list of 120 words that you can use to help you identify what you're feeling. And if either you can try to find me on YouTube, or you can go back to my website, and on the contact page, there's a vlog link, and that will take you right to the videos. So.
Thanks, Mike. We spent some time talking about your book, Confidence at the Core. And we've also spent some time talking about empathy. And given your work as an organizational leadership consultant, leadership development architect, and executive coach, how do confidence and empathy add up to make people successful at the workplace? How do they come together?
In huge ways, really. I mean, earlier on, when we talked about confidence, we were talking about all the different ways that we influence people. And whether that's influencing your boss, influencing peers, motivating your team, selling a client, convincing a client, pushing back with a client, so that's where confidence comes in at the workplace. It pretty much comes in everywhere. And empathy comes in with the same level of distribution. So the obvious one would be as if you're a supervisor and you're able to empathize. Please don't mistake me. The question was about workplace. I'm not trying to suggest that you turn the workplace into an NGO, but a little bit of empathy at the workplace goes a long way. I mean, if people feel understood, it's very easy for them to follow the person who's leading. Where empathy comes in bilateral conversations, like with a peer or with a client. Well, when you talk about closing a sale, for example, or you talk about collaborating, what you're really doing is you're trying to find the common ground between 2 poles. So you have a point of view, your peer has a point of view, and you're trying to find that middle point. Well, if you can't hear your peer's point of view, you're never going to get to that middle point. So whether it's collaboration or whether it's sales, empathy comes in there. And then when you're talking about managing up, again, empathy comes into play because at least those of you who have reasonably high levels of empathy, you would have realized that nothing works better falling into the good graces of your boss more than if you can really get into your boss's shoes and understand what is important to your boss, what's less important to your boss, and allowing your empathy with your boss to categorize your prioritization of what's most important. By doing that, inevitably, you look good in front of your boss, and so both of them apply in every facet. So it's a good question.
Great examples. And I just want to read out Remita's comment in response to your previous answer. So she had asked about how do you handle anxiety in times of uncertainty, and you answered her question. And then she responded, and I think this is powerful. So she said, wow, I didn't think you'd talk about bitterness specifically. It's what I needed to hear. Feels like I need to take a step of forgiveness. So thank you. And thanks for saying what you said. And thanks for your comment, Remita. Go on,
yeah, and Remita, I mean, first of all, I just want to applaud your courage. Because forgiveness is not easy. It takes a lot of courage. And then courage to share that. I mean, that's, it's courage on two fronts, really. So thank you.
Absolutely. Right. That's about all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, Mike, for your time and for answering all and for sharing your insights, for talking about your new book as well, Confidence at the Core. Take a look at it. It's available in the ebook format on Amazon, and you can also get a hard copy via his website, mikefisher.co. Send him an email. Mike, thank you again. Thanks so much.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I like I said, I'm really honored and just really appreciate the opportunity to share with you. So thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Bye for now. And thanks again, Mike. And thanks everyone who's here.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.